Okay, so I figured it's about time I did another update video. Um, I've gotten a little less done than normal on the plugin this past month because, quite honestly, my wife is very close to birth now, and we didn't have enough rooms in the house, so I've been building an extra room. That's taken up a lot of time, but I did get some things done. Um, and I think I'm gonna go over them from the camera perspective because it should be a little cleaner. My hands reversed. Yeah, they were. Okay. Oops. I got my movement modes wrong. Okay, so I wrote a little to-do list here. First of all is 4.18. The plugins merged over 4.18. 4.18 has a lot of good VR changes in it, but it took a bit of work to get it on it. But it's ready to go for whenever they release it. No major changes to things like characters or anything, so it wasn't that harsh. I'd started making notes about 2 weeks ago on it, so it hasn't been that bad. Viewport override is something new that I added when I heard people talking about mixed gameplay, where you have somebody at the keyboard and somebody in VR playing together at the same computer. Stop it. And I wanted to make it easier for people that were using my plugin to do that. So I made a viewport override class that when you use it, and there's an example in the template, but when you use it, it will give you options. You have to blueprint it first, and then it'll give you an enum that you can set. And you can set one mode, which is normal input, where player one gets all of the normal keyboard input and mouse input, just like a normal game, which means in VR, you're always player one. So keyboard and mouse are unusable, except for controlling this pawn, the pawn that's VR. And for the second enum option, what it does is it sets it so that all the players get the keyboard and mouse input. And the wiki, was it the wiki? The wiki or Answer Hub had an implementation of this, which is what I based this off of, but then I improved on it. It needed a few corrections to be a little better. But with all input, all the pawns will get the mouse and keyboard inputs. So, VR pawn still receives mouse and keyboard inputs if you need them, and if you ever found a use for it. With the third enum option, it sends all the keyboard and mouse inputs only to player 2. So that's the one you usually use if you're doing mixed gameplay, because then player 2 always gets the mouse and keyboard. You can base all of their movements and actions off of that, and then just mirror a render of, I guess, the scene capture component on their character into the render screen like this camera does, and then you have mixed gameplay. Now, widgets and HUDs would be a little different with that. I'd have to think about it more. But anyways, so that would work with mixed gameplays, at least inputs. There is a commented class now in the plugin called it's a VR scene capture component. Blackfang had posted on the forums that he was trying to make a stereo vision portal actor, and he was getting some late updates issues with it, and it was due to getting the HMD transform off of the camera, and then also get an HMD transform earlier in the game thread. Now, scene capture components don't really have a good method to get a late update into them because F-scene views come in after they're processed, so it's a bit of a problem. So I made a VR scene capture component that taps into the very last function that's called in game thread and updates the scene capture's position depending on left or right eye in stereo and the HMD stereo transform. It's not perfect, but it worked for my tests. I left it commented because I'm not sure I'm ever going to finish it, but it's in the plugin as a commented class, so if anybody ever wants to look at it, they can. I don't know. I don't intend to do VR portals myself. I'm assuming at some point there'll be an implementation somebody will share. I don't have a use for them. It's a gameplay specific thing. I'm not going to worry about it too much. Slider component. I forgot to put a demo of it on this board, but I added a slider component, and it's basically a C++ version of locking something into a plane, and only slides along that plane when you grip it. But it has an additional feature on it where if you set it to follow a spline component, it'll lock onto that spline and it'll follow the spline's movement and rotation along the spline. So like you could say like a spline that waves up and down and then rotates along the length of waving up and down. And when you grip it, it would go up and down as you just move your hand like this, but it's going up and down with it and then rotating. There's multiple uses for that. So it's beta. It needs more features added to it and like a percentage along the length. But I haven't gotten around to it yet. I'll get around to it soon, cleaning it up and adding more features, but it's functional currently. Net smoother. That's a decently big one. Now, how the engine works in multiplayer is that if you're the server, you smooth the position of the character. It lurks behind the actual movements a little bit, so that when they stop moving, it catches up, and when they're moving, it's slightly lurked behind. It smooths network movement. But when your client, it does the same thing, but it predicts outward with velocity, so your character is actually a little bit in front of your capsule. And it's two different smoothing methods, which is kind of weird because the server and the client don't behave the same way then, and it's a little obvious if you actually turn on the capsule and look at it. But in VR, since you're not actually using the FPS mesh, which is the only thing that's smooth natively in engine, you don't get any kind of the network smoothing. So what I did is I went in and added a net smoother scene component to all of the VR characters. And what that does is it takes the calculated smoothing ratio that normally is applied to the character mesh, and instead it applies it to this net smoother scene component, so that anything attached to that smoothing scene component gets the network smoothing that's calculated. And it didn't take much to achieve that, and it does smooth out characters when they're stopping and in motion in a network environment in VR. So I figured I might as well tap into Epic's default implementation, and as they improve it, the net smoother then will improve by itself without me having to do anything. There is some things they need to improve on it, and I'm hoping they'll get to it soon. You can also turn off the net smoothing if you don't like it, just by turning off net smoothing on the character itself. It's just configured with the normal character variables for it. Feet location. Parent relative component normally is based off of the HMD location. And that works for most things, like for this body and everything, going down with it. But somebody specifically, and I wanted to do this before, and I had it in my notes, I just hadn't done it yet. But somebody put a pull request up for having it track feet location, and that's great. So I incorporated the pull request and changed it around a little bit, made it function a little smoother with the plugin. So now if you toggle a Boolean be used for feet location or something like that on the parent relative component, instead of tracking off of the HMD's location, it'll track off at the bottom of the capsule. So you can route things up from the floor or to the floor instead of to the HMD. For like if say you want a body with its feet planted, you could do it like that. I mean, entirely depends on what kind of IK system you're using or whatever. But I mean, it's pretty useful, especially if you want to do something like, say, a circle around their feet or like a motion platform that follows along with them. You could just literally attach anything to that parent relative component and it'd go along with it. So I thought it was pretty cool, and it's part of the parent relative component now. Dial indicator rotation scaler. I had somebody that is working on a puzzle game, and he asked for a few improvements on the interactables, which is appreciated because I'm always looking for suggestions for those. And one of them was the dial component having a scaler, so that it's actually faster or slower than how much you rotate your wrist. So that's in now. There's now a dial indicator scalar variable, and you can set to whatever you want. 0.5 would be, it would only turn half as much as your wrist. 2 would be turn twice as fast as your wrist. Whatever you want to do. So I mean, that's there. It's simple to understand, not a problem. Something else somebody requested was a multi-directional lever. Let me move this camera a little bit. Get a little closer view of the lever. Okay. So this was actually a little more complicated to do than I had originally considered. You can't do it the same way as I'm doing the standard levers, and I'm just doing the standard levers how everyone else does it, where you take the A10 and you figure out its angle on the axis, and that's what you use. What I'm doing for the multi-directional lever is I'm actually taking the difference in quaternion rotation, applying it to the lever, and then taking the angle and axis of rotation and outputting those to the player. Because as far as the player is concerned, negative and minus on Y and Z don't really mean anything in a multi-directional lever. I mean, what are you going to do with that? It's not that useful. You'd have to manually plot it out, and it's actually kind of hard to calculate in the performant way. So instead, what I'm doing is I added a variable that is a current lever forward direction, I think is the name of it. And what it does is it outputs in multi-directional mode the direction that the lever is pointing in relative space to the lever. So let me get this camera up a little closer here. There we go. Now you can see the numbers. So say if I were to take the lever and I were to pull it upwards, see how it's pretty much straight up, not entirely straight up, but pretty much. So you can see how the x-axis is negative 0.9, so it's almost -1. -1 would be straight up, but it's hard to do this staring into the thing. But anyways, you can round that to less or more, to less precision if you don't want exact numbers on that. And then y, if you go out this way, up or down, we'll raise it. Flat level would be about 1 on y. Yeah. So you can take that and convert it into a directional axis for this multi-directional lever. So if I'm going up here and I have x -1, which would be here, and y -0, basically we're heading straight forward. If I go over to here, we're heading a little bit to the left. And this is based off of its center rotation from 0. So the moment you turn it at all, you can get those values. Now the angle of the lever in this mode is how far down in that direction that it's going. So you can use it with like a dead zone. So, if the angle is less than 10, you don't get any acceleration, and then you lerp based off of a percentage of the rest of the angle, stuff like that. And use it like for speed control, so it's all the way down. This is as fast as you can go forward, this is as fast as you can go forward, turning to the left, stuff like that. For the other lever modes, instead of just the multi-directional one, it still fills in this current lever forward direction, and it'll just be y, -x, x. That's it. It doesn't fill in the y or the x, whichever one it's not actually rotating along. So you can still use it for things. That's pretty much it for recent developments. I still need to take the car. Let me scale down this camera and walk forward with it for a little while. I still need to take this car and make it so that when you go outside the boundaries and it locks you in place, it'll actually give you the option to center yourself. It's really easy to do. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. And then I can also bind a button to recenter yourself. So, you get in the car, you walk until it turns black, you sit down in a chair, and then you recenter yourself, and then you're sitting down in the car and driving it. That's something I want to do, and I'll get around to it eventually. The car is functional other than that right now, so I haven't been too worried about it. 4.19 has a few changes that are incoming for how characters replicate movement. The problem with it is I've already done some of them. I basically implemented the same thing about a month ago. So it means I'm going to have to back some of it out now to support what Epic's done. It's a little inconvenient for me, but it's nice because it means that everyone else in the engine gets the improvements. And I'll just incorporate them into what I had already done. Everything should be good. I have a list of things to do still, actually. I've got a nice long list of stuff for the plugin, so I'll keep working at it, and I got to make sure 4.18 is completely stable. Got a few games for this that are nearing release now, so I'm trying to help people have stable releases and bug-free. So, I don't know. I'll continue to be busy building rooms and having my baby soon. So I don't expect to have the frenzy of updates like the when I added the net smoother and the other network related things about a month ago. But I will still consistently keep working on the plugin and adding new features. So until next time, see you.